The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I knew immediately that my life in Oak Haven Estates was about to get complicated. I stood in my kitchen holding the envelope, coffee going cold in my other hand, staring at the official-looking header that read, Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association Urgent Notice. My name, Samuel Edwards, was printed in bold letters across the front, and the red stamp proclaiming special assessment made my stomach drop. I had lived in this Phoenix, Arizona subdivision for 8 years. My wife Rachel and I had bought our 3-bedroom house right after getting married, and we had watched the neighborhood grow from a promising new development into a thriving community of 240 homes. The HOA had always been there, of course, collecting our monthly dues and occasionally sending passive-aggressive notes about trash cans left out too long or lawns that needed mowing. But this was different. This felt like a punch to the gut. I tore open the envelope and pulled out the letter. The first paragraph made my blood run cold. Dear homeowner, the Oak Haven Estates Board of Directors has voted to implement a mandatory special assessment of $8,500 per household, due within 60 days. This assessment is necessary to fund critical infrastructure repairs and community improvements. Failure to pay will result in liens against your property and potential foreclosure proceedings. $8,500, 60 days. I read it again, certain I had misunderstood. But there it was in black and white, signed by the HOA president, Barbara Patterson, along with Vice President Linda Morneau and Treasurer Kenneth Walsh. The letter provided minimal details about what these critical infrastructure repairs actually were, just vague references to urgent community needs and unforeseen expenses. I immediately called my neighbor, Mike Torres, who lived 3 houses down. He picked up on the first ring. "You got the letter too?" he asked before I could even speak. "Yeah, just opened it. $8,500. Are they insane? I have no idea where they think we are all supposed to get that kind of money. I mean, we already pay $350 a month in HOA fees. What the hell have they been doing with that money?" That was exactly the question bouncing around in my head. With 240 homes each paying $350 monthly, the HOA was collecting $84,000 every single month, over $1 million a year. Where was all that money going? "We need to call an emergency meeting," I said. "This cannot be legal. They cannot just demand this kind of money without proper documentation and transparency." Mike agreed, and we spent the next few hours calling every neighbor we could reach. By evening, we had organized an informal gathering at the community center for the following night. Word spread fast through the neighborhood. People were angry, scared, and confused. Many were young families like mine, people who had stretched their budgets to afford homes in what was supposed to be a well-maintained, affordable community. The idea of coming up with an additional $8,500 in 2 months was simply impossible for most of us. The next evening, the community center was packed. I counted at least 150 people crammed into the room, with more standing outside the doors. The energy was tense, worried conversations filling the air. I stood at the front with Mike and a few other neighbors who had helped organize the meeting. "Thank you all for coming," I started, my voice carrying over the crowd. "I think we all know why we are here. This special assessment is outrageous, and we deserve answers about where our money has been going and why we suddenly need to pay thousands more." A woman near the front raised her hand. It was Jennifer Park, a single mother who worked as a nurse at Phoenix General Hospital. "I cannot afford this. I am barely making my mortgage payments as it is. If they force this through, I will lose my house." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. An elderly man named Robert Chen spoke up from the back. "I am on a fixed income, Social Security and a small pension. There is no way I can pay this." "What are we supposed to do?" "We fight it," Mike said firmly. "We demand to see the HOA financial records. We have a right to know where our money is going. Something does not add up here." That was when Barbara Patterson walked in. She was exactly what you would picture when you heard the term HOA president from hell. Mid-50s, with an aggressive blonde bob that looked like it had been shellacked into place, wearing a power suit that seemed absurdly formal for a neighborhood meeting. She was flanked by Linda Morneau and Kenneth Walsh, both looking equally uncomfortable with the crowd's hostile energy. "I heard there was an unauthorized meeting happening," Barbara announced loudly, her voice cutting through the conversations. "I want to make it clear that this special assessment has been properly approved by the board, and it is legally binding according to our CC and Artiques. We want to see the financial records," I called out. "We want to know exactly why you need over $2 million from us when we are already paying substantial monthly fees." Barbara's expression hardened. "The board's decisions are not subject to approval by general membership. We have fiduciary responsibility for this community, and we have determined that these funds are necessary. The assessment stands." "That is not how this works," Mike countered. "Arizona law requires HOAs to maintain transparency. We have the right to review financial statements, bank records, and detailed budgets. You cannot just demand this kind of money without justification." Linda Morneau stepped forward, her arms crossed defensively. "The information you are asking for is available for review by appointment. You need to submit a written request to the board, and we will schedule a time for you to come to the office." "We are here now," Jennifer said, her voice rising with frustration. "We all got this letter demanding thousands of dollars. The least you can do is explain to us what it is for." Kenneth Walsh, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. He was a thin man in his early 60s, with nervous energy that made him constantly adjust his glasses. "The assessment covers necessary repairs to our drainage systems, road resurfacing, landscape upgrades, and reserve fund replenishment. These are standard community maintenance items." "Drainage systems," Robert Chen called out. "I have lived here for 10 years, and I have never seen any problems with drainage, and the roads were just resurfaced 3 years ago. They are fine." Barbara held up her hand imperiously. "The board has consulted with contractors and engineers. We have professional assessments that indicate these repairs are urgently needed. If we do not address them now, the costs will only increase. This is responsible financial management." "Then show us those assessments," I demanded. "Show us the contractor quotes. Show us the bank statements that prove you need this money. We are not unreasonable people, but you are asking for a huge amount of money with basically zero documentation." The confrontation went on for another hour. Barbara and her board members refused to provide any detailed information, insisting that everything was above board and that homeowners were legally obligated to pay. The crowd grew increasingly angry, voices overlapping as people demanded answers. Finally, Barbara announced that the meeting was over and that the board would not be entertaining any further discussion on the matter. "The assessment is due in 60 days, she stated firmly as she headed toward the door. "Failure to pay will result in legal action. I suggest you all start making arrangements." After they left, the room exploded with conversation. People were furious, scared, and feeling helpless. That was when Deanne Zimmerman approached me. She was in her early 40s, a real estate attorney who had moved into the neighborhood about 2 years earlier. I knew her casually from neighborhood barbecues, but we had never really talked in depth. "Samuel, can I speak with you for a moment?" she asked quietly. We stepped aside from the main group. "I have been listening to everything tonight, and something is very wrong here," Deanne said. "I specialize in property law, and while HOAs do have the legal authority to levy special assessments, there are strict requirements they have to follow. The lack of transparency, the refusal to provide documentation, the vague justifications, this all raises serious red flags." "What can we do?" I asked. "First, we need to formally request access to all HOA financial records." Arizona Revised Statutes Section 33-1805 gives homeowners the right to inspect HOA books and records. They have to comply within 10 business days. If they refuse or stonewall us, that is a violation of state law. "And if they do refuse," Diane's expression was grim, "then we escalate. We can file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA compliance. We can also contact the Arizona State Auditor's office if we suspect financial impropriety. But let me be clear, if there is actual fraud happening here, if they have been misappropriating funds, this could become a criminal matter." The word fraud hung in the air between us. I had been thinking it, but hearing someone say it out loud made it real and terrifying. Over the next week, Deanne helped me draft a formal records request. We wanted everything: bank statements, contractor invoices, reserve fund reports, meeting minutes, financial audits for the past 5 years. We got signatures from over 100 homeowners supporting the request, wanting to make it clear that this was not just a few troublemakers, but a significant portion of the community demanding accountability. I delivered the request personally to the HOA office, a small building near the community entrance. The office manager, a timid woman named Susan who clearly wanted nothing to do with the controversy, accepted the document with shaking hands. "I will make sure the board gets this," she promised. 10 business days passed, then 15, then 20. We received no response, no documents, no acknowledgement that our request had even been received beyond Susan's acceptance of the paper. "They are violating state law," Deanne told me when we met at a coffee shop in downtown Phoenix. "This is blatant non-compliance. We need to file complaints now." She helped me prepare detailed complaints to both the Arizona Department of Real Estate and the state auditor's office. In the complaints, we outlined the special assessment demand, the HOA's refusal to provide financial records, the lack of transparency, and our concerns about potential financial mismanagement or fraud. We attached copies of the assessment letter, our records request, and signed statements from dozens of homeowners describing their concerns. 2 weeks later, I received a call from an investigator named Thomas Rivera with the Arizona State Auditor's office. His voice was professional but interested. "Mr. Edwards, we have reviewed your complaint regarding Oak Haven Estates HOA. I want you to know that we take these matters very seriously. The patterns you have described, large special assessment, refusal to provide records, lack of documentation, these are common indicators of financial irregularities. We are opening a formal investigation." My heart pounded. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means we will be conducting a comprehensive audit of the HOA's finances. We have subpoena power, so the board will not be able to refuse to provide records to us the way they refused you. We will be looking at bank accounts, expenditures, contracts, everything. If there has been any misappropriation of funds, we will find it. How long will this take? These investigations typically take several months, but given the urgency of the situation with the special assessment deadline, we will prioritize this case. In the meantime, I would advise you and your neighbors not to pay the assessment until we complete our investigation. If there is fraud involved, that money could disappear. I thanked him profusely and immediately spread the word through the neighborhood. The relief was palpable. Finally, someone with actual authority was taking our concerns seriously. Finally, we might get real answers. The HOA board did not take the news well. Within days of the investigation being announced, Barbara Patterson sent out a mass email to all homeowners. The tone was aggressive and defensive, accusing certain residents of making baseless allegations and interfering with proper board governance. She insisted that the special assessment remained in effect and that failure to pay would result in consequences. But most people held firm. With a state investigation underway, very few homeowners were willing to hand over thousands of dollars to a board that was under scrutiny. I did not hear anything for several weeks. Then, on a Friday afternoon in late June, Thomas Rivera called me again. "Mr. Edwards, I need to meet with you and your neighbors. We have completed the preliminary phase of our investigation, and what we have found is extremely serious. Can you organize a community meeting for tomorrow evening?" "Of course," I said, my mouth suddenly dry. "What did you find?" "I would rather present everything to the community at once, but I will tell you this, you were right to be concerned. Very right." The next evening, the community center was even more packed than it had been for our first meeting. Word had spread that the state investigator was coming with findings, and nearly every household in Oak Haven Estates had someone present. The atmosphere was electric with nervous anticipation. Thomas Rivera arrived with 2 other investigators and a laptop connected to a projector. He was a middle-aged Hispanic man with graying hair and the serious demeanor of someone who had seen too many cases of people behaving badly with other people's money. "Thank you all for coming," he began, setting up his presentation. "My name is Thomas Rivera, and I am a senior investigator with the Arizona State Auditor's Office. Over the past 6 weeks, we have conducted a comprehensive audit of Oak Haven Estates' HOA finances. What we discovered constitutes one of the most egregious cases of HOA fraud we have seen in recent years." The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Thomas pulled up the first slide, showing a chart of HOA income versus documented expenses over the past 5 years. "Your HOA has been collecting approximately $1,008,000 annually in dues. Over 5 years, that is over $5 million. According to the financial records we obtained, the HOA should have substantial reserves and a clear accounting of where every dollar went." He clicked to the next slide. "Instead, we found that over $2.7 million cannot be properly accounted for. The money came in, but there is no legitimate documentation for where it went out." Gasps and angry murmurs filled the room. Jennifer Park was crying. Robert Chen looked like he might have a heart attack. "How is that possible?" Mike asked, his voice shaking with anger. Thomas's expression was grim. "Fraud, systematic, deliberate fraud. Let me show you some examples." He pulled up a series of documents. "This is an invoice for drainage system repairs, supposedly completed in 2023. The invoice is for $350,000, paid to a company called Southwest Infrastructure Solutions. The problem? That company does not exist. It is a shell company, registered to an address that turns out to be a UPS store. The money was deposited into an account controlled by Kenneth Walsh." The room erupted. People were shouting, some in anger, some in disbelief. Thomas waited for the noise to die down before continuing. That is just one example. We found dozens of similar fake invoices. Landscape maintenance, road repairs, legal fees, engineering assessments, all paid to companies that either do not exist or are shells controlled by the board members. Barbara Patterson created multiple vendor accounts that funneled money directly to her personal accounts. Linda Morneau ran a supposed property management company that charged the HOA exorbitant fees for services that were never actually rendered. He clicked through more slides, each one showing another layer of deception. Fake contractor quotes, forged receipts, bank transfers to personal accounts, credit card charges for personal expenses, vacations, luxury goods, home renovations, all paid for with HOA funds. The special assessment. Thomas continued. It was a desperate attempt to cover their tracks. The HOA's actual reserves are nearly depleted because of the money they have been stealing. They needed to get a large cash infusion to make the books look better before anyone started asking serious questions. They were hoping you would all pay up, they would be able to hide the evidence of their theft, and no one would be the wiser. Deanne Zimmerman stood up, her face flushed with anger. What happens now? Are they being charged? Thomas nodded, and his expression was satisfied. Earlier today, we referred our findings to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. Arrest warrants have been issued for Barbara Patterson, Linda Morneau, and Kenneth Walsh on charges of fraud, theft, money laundering, and embezzlement. Given the amounts involved, over $1 million each in misappropriated funds, they are all facing Class 2 felony charges. That carries a potential sentence of up to 12.5 years in prison. The room exploded again, but this time with a different energy. Relief, vindication, and righteous anger all mixed together. People were hugging, crying, shouting. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. We had been right. We had fought back and we had won. What about our money? Someone called out. Can we get back what they stole? Thomas held up his hands for quiet. The county attorney's office will be seeking full restitution as part of any plea deal or conviction. Additionally, all 3 defendants had assets that are now being frozen and will be subject to forfeiture. The HOA also had a fidelity bond, a type of insurance that protects against theft by board members. That bond should cover a significant portion of the missing funds. You will not get everything back immediately, but the mechanisms are in place to recover as much as possible. And the special assessment, I asked, null and void. The entire basis for it was fraudulent. No homeowner should pay a single penny of it. In fact, given the depletion of reserves due to the fraud, the state will be working with you to install a temporary oversight board to manage the HOA's finances until proper elections can be held and safeguards put in place. Over the next few days, the story exploded. Local news picked it up first, with reporters swarming the neighborhood to interview residents and get footage of the now infamous HOA office. Then state news, and eventually, it even got mentioned on a few national news sites as an example of HOA corruption run amok. I watched on the local evening news as Barbara Patterson was led out of her large, expensive home in handcuffs. She was screaming at the reporters, insisting she had done nothing wrong, that this was all a misunderstanding. The camera caught her being loaded into a police car, still protesting her innocence. Kenneth Walsh was arrested at his office, where he worked as an accountant, which made the irony even richer. Linda Morneau tried to flee, actually making it as far as the Tucson airport before being apprehended by authorities. The community was reeling, but also coming together in a way I had never seen before. We held multiple meetings to discuss the path forward. Deanne Zimmerman agreed to serve on the temporary oversight board. along with Mike Torres and 3 other residents who had backgrounds in finance and property management. Their first order of business was to conduct a complete review of what the HOA actually needed in terms of repairs and maintenance. It turned out that the infrastructure was in far better shape than the board had claimed. The roads were fine. The drainage systems were functioning properly. The landscaping needed some attention, but nothing that justified the massive expenditure they had claimed. Most of the urgent repairs they had cited in the special assessment letter were completely fabricated. The insurance fidelity bond paid out $1.2 million, which went directly into the HOA's reserve fund. The county attorney's office was also working to seize assets from the 3 defendants, including Barbara's vacation home in Sedona, Kenneth's boat, and various other luxury items they had purchased with stolen funds. The legal process would take time, but we were assured that we would eventually recover a substantial amount of the stolen money. 3 months after the arrests, the preliminary hearings began. I attended every single one, along with dozens of other Oak Haven residents. We wanted to see justice served. We wanted these people to face consequences for what they had done. Barbara Patterson maintained her innocence at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. Thomas Rivera and his team had done meticulous work, tracing every fraudulent transaction, every fake invoice, every stolen dollar. Barbara's attorney eventually advised her to take a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement in exchange for a reduced sentence of 8 years in prison and full restitution. Kenneth Walsh also took a plea deal, receiving 7 years. Linda Morneau fought the charges longer, but eventually, she too pleaded guilty and received a 9-year sentence, the longest of the 3 because she had been found to have masterminded much of the scheme. The day Linda Morneau was sentenced, I sat in the courtroom and listened as the judge read the charges and the sentence. The judge, a stern woman named Margaret Holloway, did not mince words. "You 3 held positions of trust in your community," Judge Holloway said, looking directly at Linda. "People relied on you to manage their money responsibly, to maintain their homes and their property values, to act in the best interest of the community. Instead, you exploited that trust for personal gain. You stole from families, from retirees on fixed incomes, from single parents struggling to make ends meet. You showed no remorse, no hesitation, no conscience. The sentence of this court reflects the severity of your crimes and the betrayal of trust you committed." Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a sense of closure I had not expected. It had been almost a year since that first letter arrived, demanding $8,500 I did not have for repairs that did not exist. A year of stress, investigation, community meetings, and legal proceedings. But we had won. Justice had been served. Back in Oak Haven Estates, life slowly returned to normal, though it was a different kind of normal than before. We were more engaged now, more aware of what was happening with our HOA. New board elections were held, with multiple candidates running for each position. The oversight was intense. Every financial decision was scrutinized. Every expenditure was documented and publicly available for review. Deanne Zimmerman ran for HOA president and won by a landslide. Her first act was to implement a series of reforms designed to prevent anything like the Patterson-Morneau-Walsh fraud from ever happening again. Mandatory annual audits by independent firms. Monthly financial reports posted online for all residents to review. Requiring multiple board members to sign off on any expenditure over $1,000. Creating a resident oversight committee with direct access to all financial records. The monthly HOA dues were actually reduced to $275, since we discovered that the previous high fees had been primarily designed to give the corrupt board more money to steal. The reserve fund was rebuilt slowly but steadily with the recovered assets from the criminal cases. I ran into Susan, the former office manager, at a grocery store about 6 months after everything concluded. She looked healthier, less stressed, no longer carrying the weight of working for criminals. "I am so sorry I did not say anything earlier," she told me, tears in her eyes. "I suspected something was wrong, but I was afraid of losing my job. I should have been braver." "You were in a difficult position," I assured her. "What matters is that the truth came out and justice was served." She nodded, still clearly carrying guilt. "I have been following the news. I am glad you all fought back. I am glad they are in prison." Jennifer Park, the single mother who had been so terrified about losing her house, invited several neighbors over for a barbecue one sunny Saturday afternoon, about a year after the initial special assessment letter. Her son, an energetic 8-year-old named Marcus, ran around the yard with other neighborhood kids while the adults stood around the grill, drinking beer and talking about everything except HOA drama. "You know what the crazy thing is?" Jennifer said at one point, watching her son play. "I almost paid that assessment. I was going to take out a loan, rack up credit card debt, whatever it took, because I was so scared of losing this house. If you and Mike had not organized that first meeting, if Deanne had not known the law, if we had not all stood together, I would have handed over $8,500 to those criminals, and I would still be paying off that debt today." Mike raised his beer. "To Samuel for not taking that letter lying down, to Deanne for knowing how to fight back, and to all of us for refusing to be victims. We all drank to that." Robert Chen, the elderly man on a fixed income, passed away about 18 months after the convictions. "It was natural causes, just old age, but at his funeral, his daughter sought me out. 'Dad talked about you a lot in his last months,' she said. 'He told everyone about how you and the other neighbors fought the HOA and won. He was so proud to be part of that community, so grateful that people stood up for him. He said it restored his faith in people.' That hit me harder than I expected. I had not done anything heroic, just refused to accept an obvious injustice. But maybe that was enough. Maybe that was what made the difference. 2 years after the initial letter, the county attorney's office held a final hearing on the asset forfeiture and restitution. By that point, between the insurance payout, the seized assets, and the mandatory restitution from the 3 criminals, the HOA had recovered approximately $2.1 million of the stolen $2.7 million. It was not everything, but it was substantial. The recovered funds allowed us to fully fund the reserve account, make some actual necessary improvements to the community, and even issue a one-time rebate to homeowners. I received a check for $1,200, my portion of the recovered funds. It felt surreal, holding that check, knowing it represented stolen money that had been clawed back through legal action. I thought about framing it, but instead, I deposited it and used part of it to take Rachel out to a nice dinner at a steakhouse in Scottsdale. "To surviving HOA fraud," Rachel said, raising her wine glass. "To fighting back," I corrected, touching my glass to hers. Thomas Rivera, the state investigator, came to speak at one of our HOA meetings about 6 months after the sentencing. He had been invited by Diane to talk about warning signs of HOA fraud and how communities could protect themselves. "What happened here in Oak Haven Estates is unfortunately not unique," he told the assembled residents. "HOA fraud is more common than most people realize. But what is unique is how effectively you all fought back. Most communities, when faced with resistance from their board, they just give up. They pay the assessments, they accept the lack of transparency, they feel powerless. You all refuse to be powerless, and that made all the difference. After the meeting, I approached him. "Can I ask you something? When you first got our complaint, did you think we were just troublemaking homeowners complaining about normal HOA business?" Thomas laughed. "Honestly, I get a lot of complaints about HOAs. Most of them are legitimate grievances about lack of transparency or poor decision-making, but they do not rise to the level of criminal fraud. When I first read your complaint, though, something about it felt different. The amount of the special assessment, the complete refusal to provide any documentation, the timing, it all had the hallmarks of a cover-up. I had a gut feeling that if we dug deep enough, we would find something serious. I was right, but even I was surprised by how extensive the fraud was." "What happens to them now?" "Barbara and Linda and Kenneth. They are all in Arizona State Prison, serving their sentences. They will be eligible for parole eventually, but given the severity of their crimes and the lack of remorse they showed, I doubt they will get out early. And even when they do get out, they will have records as convicted felons. Their lives as they knew them are over. I should have felt satisfaction at that, and part of me did. But mostly, I just felt sad. Sad that people would make such destructive choices, that they would betray their neighbors and community for money, that they had thrown away their lives and freedom for luxury items and vacations. 3 years after that initial letter, Oak Haven Estates was thriving. Property values had actually increased because the neighborhood had gained a reputation as a community that held its leadership accountable. People wanted to live in a place where residents stood up for themselves, where corruption was not tolerated, where justice prevailed. New families moved in. Kids played in the parks. The community center hosted events and classes. The pool was well maintained. The streets were clean. Everything an HOA was supposed to provide, we actually had now, and we had it at a lower cost than when the corrupt board had been in charge. I sometimes drove past the houses where Barbara and Linda and Kenneth used to live. New families occupied those homes now, people who had no connection to the fraud and drama that had consumed our community. Barbara's old house had a swing set in the backyard. Kenneth's place had a vegetable garden. Linda's home had been repainted a cheerful yellow. Life moved on. One evening, about 4 years after everything started, I was sitting on my front porch with Rachel, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of orange and pink. A young couple walking their dog stopped to chat. They had just moved in 2 weeks earlier. "Everyone keeps telling us about some big fraud case," the woman said. "Something about the old HOA board." I smiled and gave them the abbreviated version, hitting the highlights without dwelling on all the stress and uncertainty of that time. "Wow," the man said when I finished. "So you basically took down a criminal organization." "I would not go that far," I protested. "We just asked questions and refused to accept non-answers. The state auditor did the real work." "Still, that takes courage," the woman said. "A lot of people would have just paid the money and complained quietly." After they walked on, Rachel squeezed my hand. "She is right, you know. You did a brave thing. You could have stayed quiet, avoided the confrontation, let someone else fight the battle, but you did not." "We all fought it together," I said. "Mike, Diane, Jennifer, Robert, everyone. That is what made the difference. One person complaining is easy to ignore. A united community demanding accountability, that is powerful." The last time I thought about Barbara Patterson, Linda Morneau, and Kenneth Walsh was when I saw a news article about prison reform and rehabilitation programs in Arizona. I wondered if they were participating, if they felt remorse now, if they understood the magnitude of what they had done. I wondered if they thought about the people they had stolen from, the families they had hurt, the trust they had destroyed. But mostly, I did not think about them at all anymore. They were a closed chapter, a problem that had been solved, a wrong that had been righted. Oak Haven Estates had moved on, stronger and more united than before. The monthly HOA meetings were well attended now, with residents actively participating in decisions about their community. The financial reports were reviewed and discussed. Proposals for improvements were debated and voted on. It was democracy in action, on a small scale, but genuine and meaningful. Diane served 2 terms as HOA president before stepping down to focus on her law practice. Mike took over after her, continuing the transparent, accountable approach to governance. The reforms that had been implemented became permanent features of our HOA's bylaws, protections against future corruption. I never ran for the board myself. I preferred to be an active, engaged resident rather than a leader. I attended meetings, reviewed financial reports, voted on issues, but left the day-to-day management to others. My contribution had been to start the fight, to refuse to accept the injustice, to rally the community when it mattered most. That was enough for me. 5 years after that Tuesday morning when I opened the letter demanding $8,500, I stood in my kitchen again, holding another piece of mail from the HOA. This one was different. It was a newsletter, professionally designed, full of information about upcoming community events, financial highlights showing healthy reserves and responsible spending, and profiles of new residents joining our neighborhood. At the bottom was a small note from Deanne, who still contributed to the newsletter even though she was no longer on the board. Remember, an engaged community is a protected community. Stay informed, ask questions, hold your leaders accountable. What we built here in Oak Haven Estates is something special. Let us never take it for granted. I pinned the newsletter to my refrigerator and poured myself a cup of coffee, this one hot and fresh. Through the window, I could see neighbors walking dogs, kids riding bikes, someone washing their car. Normal, everyday life in a community that had faced down corruption and emerged stronger. The story of Oak Haven Estates became something of a legend in HOA circles around Arizona. Other communities facing similar issues reached out to us for advice. Deanne gave presentations at homeowner workshops. Mike was interviewed for articles about HOA governance. Our little neighborhood had become an example of what was possible when residents refused to be victims. But for me, the most important outcome was not the recognition or the recovered money or even the justice of seeing the criminals imprisoned. It was the knowledge that when faced with injustice, I had not looked away. I had not accepted it. I had fought back and I had won. That Tuesday morning 5 years earlier, standing in my kitchen with that letter, I had a choice. I could have paid the money, grumbled about it, and moved on with my life. A lot of people would have made that choice, taken the path of least resistance, avoided the confrontation and stress of fighting back. But I had chosen differently, and that choice had changed everything. It had exposed criminals, recovered stolen funds, reformed a broken system, and brought a community together. It had shown that ordinary people, when united and determined, have more power than they realize. Looking back now, I would not change a thing. The stress, the uncertainty, the months of investigation and legal proceedings, all of it was worth it. We had made Oak Haven Estates a better place. We had held wrongdoers accountable. We had proven that justice, while sometimes slow, could prevail. And if I ever received another suspicious letter from an HOA, if I ever encountered another situation where someone in power was abusing their authority, I knew exactly what I would do. I would ask questions. I would demand answers. I would rally my community. I would fight back. Because that is what you do when you encounter injustice. You do not accept it. You do not look away. You stand up, you speak out, and you fight for what is right. Sometimes you lose. Sometimes the system fails. But sometimes, just sometimes, you win. And when you do, it makes all the struggle worthwhile. The sun set completely, darkness settling over Oak Haven estates. Lights came on in houses throughout the neighborhood. Families sat down to dinner. Kids did homework. Dogs barked. Life continued in all its ordinary, beautiful complexity. And somewhere in 3 separate Arizona state prisons, 3 people who had betrayed their community served their sentences, paying the price for their crimes. Justice, delayed but not denied. Accountability, hard-won but achieved. A system that worked eventually, because people refused to let it fail. I raised my coffee cup in a silent toast to my neighbors, to Thomas Rivera and his investigators, to Diane and Mike and Jennifer and Robert and everyone else who had fought alongside me. To ordinary people doing extraordinary things, to communities that protect their own, to justice served. The story of Oak Haven Estates and the great HOA fraud was over. But the lessons learned, the reforms implemented, the bonds forged in that struggle, those would last forever. We had built something that mattered, created something worth protecting, proven something worth remembering. Sometimes the good guys win. Sometimes crime does not pay. Sometimes justice prevails. This was one of those times, and I would carry that knowledge with me for the rest of my life. The fight had been worth it. Every moment, every stress, every uncertainty, because in the end we had won. And Oak Haven Estates was home, truly home in a way it had never been before.